30. As mentioned before, this etude will really exercise the articulation for the student, as well as your third measure first system, possibly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth system, last measure, and then second system from the bottom, measures 1 and 2. Could be your little technical problems for the students. I would pretty much suggest that your third measure first line is the one that's the most difficult because of the disjunctness of the line and aspects to that. For the articulations, I've already made reference to that. This is a really good idea. Your students, eventually, for me, fundamental playing and being an advanced performer, there's a fine line between the two because your advanced performer has great fundamentals. And so if you have your young students work on their fundamentals, they become advanced players. I mean, it's when you say, well, I do this for my fundamentals and I do that for my advanced, I'm either a simpleton or, to me, they're one and the same. I can't really divide the line. We might be in different aspects on the timeline, so to speak, of development, but we're all doing the same things. And so I can tell you for saxophonists, we should be doing scales full range, and that's simply you start on tonic, go to the highest note on the horn that's in that key, down to the lowest note on the horn in that key, back up to tonic. I recommend doing it 2 times sequentially, because you'll find that the first time you might get away with something, and you'll find the second time around it shows up that something didn't work out right the first time. This is how you practice your fingerings, your technique, and then you apply those articulations to that aspect, and you'll find that, I think of articulations are very much like doing sit-ups. It's a multi-group exercise, muscle group exercise. You're working on tongue-finger coordination, you're working on tongue velocity, you're working on tone, control, every aspect. Okay, so I'd really strongly recommend students, performers that are in the group, start doing this. And I wrote out just the E major scale. You don't have to just do that. Put it on all 12 major scales. What I'd like to do, since time is waning, is I want to run through that measure 3, first line, in different ways that the students, that you should and could be practicing this. Some of this, I don't believe I put what I call regrouping. No. The creative practice techniques, these different rhythms work really well, which I'm going to run you through real quick. And then also I want to talk about a philosophy that I call regrouping that also works really well. So when a student is trying to master this and get the technique together, if they will change the rhythms and play like long, short, and I usually try to get them to double dot the rhythms, make them extremely crisp. Usually have them try to do it 3 times in a row. Then reverse it, which is really awkward, short, long. Do it 3 times in a row. Keep doing that. Then when we come, some of these rhythms that I have on there are more designed for depending on the meter. Like when you get to the triplets and the other ones, that one may not work so well. And then 5 and 6, but you can certainly apply those. When you get to regrouping, what regrouping is about is I find quite often students try to practice within metric groupings. when in most times, probably 9 times out of 10, your musical phrase or your motive or the actual fragment of music does not follow any metric grouping. It goes across them. And so what you can have students do is regroup. Like for this time, I'm going to play up to the high C each time. So you're just playing up to it. And that will help them facilitate getting through these. So you can also go ahead and use your metric groupings. As you're going through. And this will really develop the finger technique. Philosophically, if you're practicing this note long, the next one really short, and the third one long, it's forcing you to think 3 notes ahead. When you reverse that, you've then picked up the notes that went by really quick the second time. So theoretically, you've practiced everything twice its tempo. That's the whole philosophy behind it. But in reality, it just makes it easier for you to execute when you get your fingers going in the right place and aligns your tongue and the fingers. One last thing that I want to do with the time that I have is talk about a technique called tongue release. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Or tongue stop? Okay. Yeah, and this will come in handy when you're practicing those articulations on the scale. It simply means clipping, and I know you've always been told, and band directors forgive me, but you've always been told never stop the sound with the tongue. And that is true, except for in fast technical situations where you have a slur and then it's followed by staccato 16ths. We actually will exaggerate and do something called a tongue release. Where you're trying to, forgive the analogy, but clip the back note attached to the slur. It allows you to put the le détaché or the separation in staccato. It also helps align the tongue and the fingers for the technical approach to the etudes. And it does not have to be non-musical. How much, I can either clip it just grossly and give it no musical value, or you can give it a little bit more length. Depends on how much length you give the note before the tongue. Because in actuality, your tongue starts on the reed, comes off, and then it's going back on the reed at some point again. So it's a very natural technique and one that you should practice when you're doing the scale with the articulations put on it. If you took it helps make it really pristine the faster you go. The last analogy that I'll leave you with, you ever seen spoke wheels, right? And they start to spin to the point where you no longer can see the pattern of the wheel. And then all of a sudden it goes fast enough that all of a sudden you see the wheel actually starts to rotate backwards or something. You know what I'm talking about? That's what I think about with articulation. When you use the tongue release and you want that type of clarity, the faster we go, you want it to, as it begins to spin fast, you want that clarity coming out with the articulation. If we can't tell what the articulation is, I'm not really sure what the point of having it is. Does that make sense? Artistically, and our first objective as performers is to the intent of the composer, as to what was written, and trying to get it to come to fore. I'm afraid I think I'm over time or out of time, so I should stop. Are there any quick questions about 30? I'm sorry this was kind of fast and furious.
Do we have time for you to play the whole piece?
I can give it a shot if